There are a multitude of lineup combinations for the Tar Heels this upcoming season, so just how is Coach Hubert Davis going to divide up all the minutes?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Friday, July 19th, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and you're joining me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch, and I want to send a special shout out to all you everydayers out there and all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. Glad that you're all here. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Coming up on the show today, it's going to be a fun one. We're projecting the minutes allocation to the 11 scholarship players. We're going to look at how Coach Davis might be using his depth versus his starters. We've got 3 years of data now, so we're starting to get a little better idea on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the bigs in the class of 2025 and what other players Carolina might be in good shape with. There's one in particular that we're feeling a little bit good about right now. So we're going to get into all of that. Let's start right off with this minutes projection. This is a fun exercise that I love to do every offseason. We've actually been talking a good bit about it already in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord. If you've missed out on that, and you're already part of the Discord, man, hop in and find it. It's in the Basketball Men channel. If you're not part of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, come on into that. As a reminder, always, it's free to join, and the link is in the show notes. So here's how we're doing this. It's not a 200-minute per game allocation, which is how it all adds up, right? You get 5 guys on the floor at a time for 40 total minutes. That's 200 minutes. But when you look at a minutes per game average at the end of the season, you don't get a true 200 minutes if you add up your whole team. So the way I'm actually doing this, when you look at the minutes per game average for an entire season of the top 11 contributors of the Hubert Davis era, the average is just shy of 217 minutes. It's like 216.9 or something like that. So what I wanted to do for this exercise was dole out 217 minutes per game to the 11 scholarship players. I hope you're tracking with that and what it makes sense to do. So I'm going to give it to you what I've broken down from most minutes per game to fewest minutes per game. And then we'll do some observations and takeaways. I'm going to speculate who I'm too high on, who I'm too low on from a minute standpoint, and then we'll go on from there. So let's start at the top, and this is the only duh of the whole group, the biggest no-brainer, and quite frankly, the only player I feel really good and confident about his minutes allocation, and that is RJ Davis. RJ, I have projected at 34 minutes a game, which is probably going to make a ton of sense. Last year, he played 34.8. A slight bump down would be nice, get some wear and tear off his legs, but we'll see what happens there. One of the other things that I did in preparation for this was I averaged out every position on the top 11 for Coach Davis's 3 years at North Carolina and how many minutes per game that position on the depth chart played. So, for example, the number 1 player on the depth chart in the Hubert Davis era has averaged 34.9 minutes per game. So I've got RJ at 34. That's right in line with that. And then everybody else after this, I don't feel very confident about at all, except maybe the very back end, the last player. But everything in between, man, this could go a whole bunch of different ways. Number 2, this might come as a surprise to some people, and I expect to get pushback on this one. I have Cade Tyson averaging the second most minutes per game at 31. I think this because what he brings to the Tar Heels is a very unique role for the team. The size, the shooting, the ability to play probably at the 3 or the 4, depending on what's going on. What he does beyond just shooting as somebody who last year had more 2-point than 3-point attempts. He gets in and he helps with rebounding. So I've got him at 31 minutes a game, second most on the team. What's interesting about that is the second player on the depth chart in the Hubert Davis era averages 33.87 minutes per game. So I have him slightly under that. Third most on the team, I have Elliot Cadeau right behind Cade Tyson at 30 minutes a game. Last year, Elliot was down at 23 per game. I think he's going to be all the more important this year, and I believe that his game has grown with that importance, and so Coach Davis will rely on him all the more as a sophomore guard. I think that his shooting, both from a free throw standpoint and a three-point shooting standpoint, will blossom this year and will allow there to not be that need to take him off the floor. So I have him at 30 minutes per game, third on the depth chart in the 3 years, averages 31.37 minutes per game, so pretty close to that. Fourth, and this is where stuff started to get all the more for me. I don't feel confident about this, but I have Jalen Washington fourth at 25 minutes per game. I have that because he's the one that's been in the system the longest. I think he's going to get the biggest crack, and the one that I think the coaching staff is hoping takes the reins of that starting five position. Interestingly, in the Hubert Davis era, the player with the fourth most minutes per game has averaged 30.33, and I have Jay Wash at 25, so that's 5 minutes under that, but I've spread the love out a little bit more because you'll see it shift a little bit here in a second, and so down on that. Fifth most minutes, and this is one where there might be some pushback. I have Ian Jackson at 20 minutes per game. The average in the Hubert Davis era for the fifth most minutes per game is 27.87. So he's way down from that, almost 8 minutes per game below it. But I have both Ian and then tied for fifth most minutes, I have Seth Trimble at 20 minutes per game too. I think his experience, his defense, his savvy is going to continue to grow. Last year was about 17 minutes a game. But that, where we've had Jalen Washington and Ian Jackson south of where Hubert Davis's top five have played there. Seth Trimble in this tied for fifth, that position has averaged 17.9 minutes per game, and I have him at 20. And then here's another big flip. Seventh most minutes, I have Drake Powell at 18 minutes per game. That's well above the Hubert Davis average for the seventh position on the depth chart, which is 11.97 minutes per game. Following that, I have Ven-Allen Lubin, eighth most minutes at 15 a game. The eighth spot in the Hubert Davis era has averaged 9.93 minutes per game, so he's up above that. And then tied at ninth, I have both Jae'lyn Withers and Zayden High averaging 10 minutes a game. Those two slots, like 9 and 10, in the Hubert Davis era have averaged 8.23 and 5.8, so that's up above that. And then 11th on my minutes per game projection for next year is James Brown at 4 minutes per game. And that's right in line with what the 11th player on the Hubert Davis depth chart has averaged 4.8 minutes per game. So let me run you back through this one more time so you can get it, because I kind of chunked it all up. RJ Davis, 34 minutes. Cade Tyson, 31. Elliot Cadeau, 30. Jalen Washington, 25. Ian Jackson and Seth Trimble at 20. Drake Powell at 18. Ven-Allen Lubin, 15. Jae'lyn Withers and Zayden High both at 10. And James Brown at 4. All right, gang. Carve it up. That's what we all do best. Would love to hear your pushback on this. All right, where I want to get to next is that who am I too low on? I have 3 players that I think I might be too low on in terms of their minutes per game. And the flip side of that, 3 players that I might be too high on. I want to get to all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you about game time. Going to MLB games in the summer is hands down one of my favorite all-time things to do. The game, food, the people, everything that's part of the experience. I'm excited to make all new memories this summer at the ballpark. I even got to do that on July 4th with my family. And thankfully, if you're doing that, if you're getting tickets last minute, you don't have to sweat high-priced versions of that, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, making tickets faster and easier to grab. In fact, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Here's some examples. Wednesday, July 24th, my beloved Braves have a day game against the Reds and Ellie De La Cruz at home. $5 you can get in the door to Truist. How great is that? Or maybe you want to see the Braves at the Mets in New York the next day on Thursday. The Mets are giving out pickleball paddles that day. Tickets as low as $9. If you're just wandering around Manhattan wondering what you want to do, go to the Mets game. I know it's not in Manhattan, but you know what I mean. So anyway, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I just gave you my minutes projection as of right now, right? As of Friday, July 19th. This thing could obviously change as we start to see more about how the team's fitting together. Will they bring in another player like Juice that we talked about on yesterday's show? If so, that probably changes this whole calculus, and we got to do this whole exercise all over again. So I first want to ask myself, right? Like I always want to be aware of my own potential blind spots. And so I want to say, who am I potentially too low on? I've got 3 players for you. Number 1, Ven-Allen Lubin. I gave him 15 minutes a game. He's somebody that obviously the coaching staff brought in because they think he can be a key player, whether at the 4 or small ball 5, whatever it's going to be. And so at 15 minutes a game, I might be selling him short. And I think a lot of that depends on Jalen Washington, if we're being honest. So watch for Ven-Allen Lubin. Is Isaac too low on him? Second, I'm potentially too low on Jae'lyn Withers. Last year, he averaged 12 minutes a game. Let me double check that I'm not lying about that. Jae'lyn Withers, 12.4 minutes a game last year. I have him down for 10 this year, and so it might be weird to think about him regressing in terms of minutes played, especially as he gets more comfortable in his role in the system and everything that Coach Davis is trying to have him do. But I just think from the consistency or lack thereof that we saw last year, if he doesn't grow in that, I don't know that you necessarily need to give him more minutes. And then the third player that I might be too low on is Drake Powell. And I know I got him at 18 minutes. But if he really shows this full whole package that we think he's capable of doing and forces his way onto the court, I might be too low on him. I don't think I am, but I could see a world in which I am, if that makes sense. All right, what about the flip side of this? Who am I too high on? Who did I allocate too many minutes to? Let me give you 3. And I just said maybe I was too low on Ven-Allen Lubin, and that might mean I'm too high on Jalen Washington. I allocated him 25 minutes a game. Let me remind you that last year he only played 8.3 minutes per game. But he's playing behind Armando Bacot, minutes eater, a dude that played a ton. And now, again, this front court is wide open for somebody to take the reins on and say, I'm about to be the dude, get behind me. And whoever that is going to get a bunch of minutes. But if Jalen Washington isn't fully ready for that leap, instead of 25 minutes, I could see him being somewhere in the teens, maybe up to 20. And so I could hear that I am too high on J-Wash. Another person I might be too high on is Ian Jackson. I've given him 20 minutes per game. But let's remember, this is a loaded backcourt. It is an era of college basketball where teams aren't relying on freshmen as much as they once did, especially this year while we've got one more year of players with COVID eligibility playing. And if it takes Ian a little bit of time, I know he showed out in the scrimmages, but we have all seen it. Those scrimmages from summer camp are wildly different from the actual games come November and on, right? And so I could see a world in which Ian Jackson is closer to 15 or 12 or something like that rather than 20. And then those minutes would probably grow as the year wears on and he gets more comfortable and better. So I might be too high on him. The other I could see being way too high on is Cade Tyson, right? I gave him 31 minutes a game. And that's because I think everything he's done at Belmont from the overt things that everyone sees, like scoring and shooting and rebounding, to the unheralded things he does, like low turnover percentage, for example. I think that's going to translate. But if it doesn't, if his shot isn't falling consistently, if he's not able to attack the rim, if he's getting beat up on defense, at 31 minutes a game I gave him is not going to hold up, right? And so that is the third player I might be too high on. So I could be too low on Ven-Allen Lubin, Jae'lyn Withers, and Drake Powell. I could be too high on Jalen Washington, Ian Jackson, and Cade Tyson. And I think what we see in all of this conversation, even what I said right off the top about only player I'm really confident about the minutes I gave to him is RJ Davis. The thing is, and we talked about this on Thursday night in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, Kiwi Juice said, this team is going to be the most complex to manage in terms of minutes in the HD era. And I think that's a great point. And I think it's for a couple reasons. Number one, there are players that can play a multitude of positions, which is a good thing. But it's also a hard and confusing thing because how do the pieces best fit? How do you allocate the minutes? What sort of lineups do you go with? Can you have multiple different sets, almost like you would with a football team, right? Where you got different schemes and different player personnel groups. And so I think that's going to make this all the tougher to navigate. I think in that conversation, our guy Riley Davis was just talking about, we might see Coach Davis in tinkering a lot more than he typically does early in the season, maybe all the way up through ACC play, all the way through non-con play, right? And so we're going to have to wait and see what happens there. So that's a really interesting part of this conversation as well. So another part of this is, now that we've got 3 years of data of the Coach Davis era, we're getting a more accurate sample size of what he brings to the table. I wouldn't say that it is we used to say, hey, it's a too small sample size, but here's what we've seen. Now we can say, hey, it's a pretty decent sample size we've now got of 3 years of data on Coach Davis. So while prepping for this minutes breakdown exercise, I noticed a very interesting trend that you probably would have guessed something like this, but maybe didn't have the stats or data to back it up. I was comparing, what I was saying I did about how I went through the depth chart and looked at the average minutes per game at each position on the depth chart for the top 11. So I did that for all 3 seasons of the Hubert Davis era, and I did it for all 18 seasons of the Roy Williams era. Here's what I found. How many seasons did 3 or more players average 30 or more minutes a game in the Hubert Davis era and in the Roy Williams era? So are you with me on that? 3 or more players averaging 30 minutes or more a game. In the Hubert Davis era, that has happened all 3 seasons. There have been at least 3 players to average 30 or more minutes. In the Roy Williams era, 18 seasons, that also happened 3 times, but 3 out of 18 total seasons. Other than that, there was not, it means all the other 15 seasons, there were 2 or fewer players who averaged 30 minutes a game. How about we up the ante? How many seasons did 4 or more players average 30 minutes a game? In the Hubert Davis era, it's the exact same number. All 3 seasons, 4 or more players have averaged 30 minutes a game. In the Roy Williams era, never. How about that? All 18 seasons, there was never one at North Carolina where 4 or more players averaged 30 minutes a game. Interesting. How about 5? Has there ever been a season where 5 players averaged 30 more minutes a game? Yes. 1 in the Hubert Davis era, but never, obviously, in the Roy Williams era, based on what we just talked about. In the Hubert Davis era, do you want to make a guess on what season it was? Because you'd probably be wrong. If I were you, I would have guessed the Iron 5 season, and that is incorrect. It was actually the 2022-23 season that all 5 starters averaged 30 or more minutes a game. And then the 6th most minutes per game played was 16. Massive drop off there that we saw in that season. And consequently, Carolina was very, very low on how they used their depth. In fact, as I went through and did this minutes per game comparison for both coaches at every position on the depth chart, again, we've got that 3-year sample size for Coach Davis, 18-year sample size for Coach Williams. It was very interesting, the differential. So, for example, The player with the most minutes played, the average of that in the Hubert Davis era is 34.9. In the Roy Williams era, it was 32.1. So a difference of plus 2.79 in the Hubert Davis era. Not shockingly, the top 5 positions were higher in the Hubert Davis era, and then positions 6 through 11 were all higher in the Roy Williams era because of how much more he used his depth. Interestingly, the biggest differentials, the biggest positive differential in the Hubert Davis era, the biggest minus differential in the Hubert Davis era, the biggest plus was position 5 on the depth chart. Player number 5 in terms of most minutes played averaged 27.87 in the Hubert Davis era, just 23.67 in the Roy Williams era. That's a difference of 4.19 minutes per game. And then the biggest differential where the Roy Williams era player played the most was at position number 7, where position 7 in the Hubert Davis era has played just 11.97 minutes per game, where in the Roy Williams era, it was 15.95 minutes per game, a change of 3.98, so almost 4 minutes per game more in the Roy Williams era. So as you look at that chart, which I haven't posted anywhere, I guess I could in our Discord chat, just to see that, but it's really interesting to see how those minutes breakdowns change and differentiate. I mean, you could even look, I went also and looked at the KenPom bench usage data. And as you are well aware, probably because we talk about it a lot, or if you're new to the show, let me fill you in. In the 3 years of the Hubert Davis era, here is the bench usage percentage for the Tar Heels. Coach Davis's first year was 19.8. The Tar Heels, 19.8% of all minutes for the Tar Heels went to the bench. That was good for 348th in the nation. The low point was Coach Davis's second season. Carolina used their bench 18.3%. That was 360th in the nation out of 363 total teams. And then last year, it was up to 22.6%, 332nd in the nation. By comparison, Coach Williams, his lowest bench usage was 26.3% at Carolina, like 4 percentage points higher than the highest of Coach Davis era. In fact, Coach Williams' highest bench usage at Carolina was 36.6%. Of the 15 years, Coach Davis was at Carolina 18 years. KenPom started recording bench usage data after in Coach Williams' 4th year. So there's 15 years of that. Of those 15 years, Coach Williams used his bench 30% or more of the minutes, 10 total seasons. Wild stuff when you look back at that. And so as I think about these two coaches and their use of depth, I'll say it this way. I honestly wish Roy Williams had used and relied on his stars a little more, right? Not quite as much bench usage. But in the same breath, I would like to see Coach Davis rely on his starters less early in the season, take more time to see what he's got kind of in a Roy Williams way, even if that means maybe you lose another game or two. But then as you get into ACC play in February and March, then start relying on his starters and his stars at the level he does now. Because you really only need an 8-man rotation to survive and do really well in college basketball. So that's kind of what I'm seeing and finding as I look at all these minutes and data. It's really interesting now to get more of a sample size on Coach Davis. So I'd love to hear your feedback on all that. What do you think about Coach Williams' use of his minutes per game and how he allocated that versus Coach Davis? Are you like me? You want to see it somewhere in between or lean more one way or the other? Let me know. Now, 2025 center Eric Reibe, who we've talked about before, has cut his list down to 11. I know it's a big number, but the Heels have made the cut. So what I want to do is have a little bit of a conversation about what Carolina should be looking for in the front court for 2025. We'll get to that in just a second. On Thursday, center, 7-footer, big man, Eric Reibe cut his list down to 11 schools. He's a class of 2025 guy. And I'll tell you, it's just a bunch of big names. There's always like 1 or 2 left out. So you got a lot of the big names, but like not Duke on this list, for example. So here's the 11 schools. North Carolina, I already told you that. But the other 10 are UConn, Kentucky, Kansas, Creighton, Harvard, sneaking in there, Indiana, Ohio State, West Virginia, Oregon, and Stanford. So big list. It's not really worth talking about it right now because there's just too many schools. But what it does lead me to do is to want to have a conversation about the bigs for 2025. Our guy Nintendo on Discord asked me on Thursday night as we were kind of talking about this. Here's a question. If Juice, who is Julius Halifanoa, ends up deciding, by the way, if you're not familiar with who Julius is, nicknamed Juice, he's a Kiwi, a New Zealand player that Carolina is talking to right now. It kind of seems like there's a possibility he will reclass to 24 and might come. Seems like if so, it's down to Carolina and Kentucky. But Nintendo's question is this: if Juice ends up deciding not to reclassify, do you think we maintain conversations with him, or do we prioritize our other offers for 2025? So basically what Nintendo is asking there is if Juice decides to stay in 2025, where Carolina already has offers out to Eric Reibe and Malachi Moreno, another 7-footer, do you just stick with those guys, or do you continue to talk to Juice as well and have 3 kind of options at center? And my response is, I think you definitely continue to talk to him, even if he stays in 2025. Gives him another year to mature. Obviously, there's less of a likelihood he comes to college at that point because he's already 18. But he has said he wants to come to college. And so I think you keep those conversations going. In this era where the landscape's changing all the time because of the transfer portal and what other guys are wanting to do, I think you maintain conversations as long as you can. I mean, what happens? Let's say Juice goes to college, doesn't like his fit, wants to stay in college and transfers. That's another reason in this era to continue all these conversations, because you want him to remember, if he's looking for a new school, oh man, I loved how Hubert Davis treated me even when I chose another school. I want to go there. That's another reason for it. So here's the thing. Obviously, Carolina doesn't want all 3 of these bigs and aren't going to get all 3 between Juice and Malachi Moreno and Reibe. But several programs, if you can land 2 of them, that's not a bad thing. There are several programs that have held on to 2 high-level bigs, even while only playing 1 at a time. So it's not like, oh, we get 2 of them, we got to play them to keep them happy. Here's an example from UConn's championship 2 years ago, not the most recent one. 2 years ago, they were rotating between Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan, who was the man this year. And that worked well. Clingan was a freshman. He was a team player. He stuck it out, and then he got his shot this year. And so there are other examples of that, but that's just one high-level example of 2 really strong bigs, 2 7-foot bigs being able to play together. Now, part of this conversation also is I think Malachi Moreno is ultimately going to end up at Kentucky, and so making Reibe and Juice all the more important. So if you could grab both of those guys, or even one of them, that's a big win. So again, all the more reason to continue to talk to Reibe, even if he stays in 2025. Now, another part of this conversation, though, is we also need to keep our eyeballs on how the front court develops this year, because multiple of these guys are going to continue to develop. After the 24-25 season, that's this season, Jay Witt is done. He's out of eligibility, but Jay Wash and Ven-Allen Lubin have 1 more year left. Zayden High will have 2 more years. James Brown will have 3. So you got those 4 guys, and if 2 of them blow up and do what you want, you're in good shape. Then maybe you're looking at these freshmen coming in. Then maybe you're looking at transfer portal again, where hopefully you don't strike out over and over again like this offseason. But there's a lot of possibilities, and I think that's the good but also the difficult of the era that we live in right now. All right, great question from Nintendo. Fun thinking ahead to the front court for the 25-26 season. Wow, seems so far away, but is really, really not. All right, gang, a great week on the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to Locked On Tar Heels on audio and video, go ahead and do that. Make sure you are not missing a second of our show. We have a great time together, and we'd love to have you part of it, especially as we get closer to August. It's almost football season. Things are going to be cranking up. We can't wait. If you're not part of this Locked On Tar Heels Discord community that we've been talking a lot about on today's show, we'd love to have you. Again, the link is in the show notes and it's free to join. Come for the Tar Heels, stay for the community. All right, gang, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll be back with you on Monday, but until then, peace.